Hi, hello, and welcome or welcome back to the Wool Sea Knitting channel. My name is Rachel. I'm a knitter based in Ottawa, Canada, and this is my chatty outlet to talk all things knitting with occasional guest appearances by other crafts, including today. I have been doing a lot of knitting, but not a lot of filming, and I've given a lot of those knits away. So up until very recently, I had nothing to show you guys because I was finishing gifts right up until the moment I had to give them to people, and then I gave them away. So I was proud of myself for even getting photos of most of these things, and that left me without much to talk about on the podcast. But I'm here now. I have many fun things to show you, and I'm just excited to chat. It is the middle of February. We've had some beautiful snow and some gorgeous winter weather. The canal is open. If you're unaware of this, the city I live in has the world's largest skating rink. It's a canal that freezes over and then everybody skates on it. It's called the Rideau Canal. So first I finished the storm sweater for my mother. I knit it in Senna's Garn Double Sunday in the color Banana, which has since been discontinued. And in my last podcast, I kept saying that I was knitting the pattern in the yarn that was recommended, and I wasn't. The pattern calls for Pure Gint, and I use Double Sunday, but those two are virtually interchangeable when it comes to weight and use, so I think that that worked out just fine, and I think it worked out great. She swears up and down that she is thrilled with the finished object and the fit and that she's been wearing it. And personally, I think that hers looks better on her than mine does on me, and I'm a little bit jealous, but that's okay. I think that's the best case scenario. As long as she is happy with it and it suits her and it's practical and she gets use out of it, that's the only thing that matters. That means the gift is a success, and I enjoyed knitting the pattern twice. I think beyond that, if you want to see the garment in motion, I talk about it more at length in my last podcast episode when I had it as a whip to show people. But yeah, that was my first finished object. The second I don't have photos of, but it's a really basic burgundy 3x1 ribbed sock with a charcoal toe. I knit them 2 at a time. These were for my brother. I finished these the day I gave them to him. They were sitting on the vent drying as we were waiting for him to come over when I was staying at my mother's, and they fit. I think that they're a little bit shorter on the leg than he wanted, and that's because I grossly overestimated how much yarn I would need. So I knit the leg, I think only to 4.5 inches, and that's unstretched. So I think it probably shrank down to 4 inches before starting the heel. And I ended up with about 30 grams of yarn left. So I certainly could have made them longer, but again, I think that he'll be able to wear them comfortably and everything will be fine. And last and probably most significant, because I finished it the most recently, so it's very much, I think, still kind of affecting my knitting now, or looms large in my mind, is I knit a cardigan for my grandfather. He asked for this in the fall when I asked, what would you like to receive as a gift this year? And he said a cardigan, and I was expecting him to say socks or a hat. So that affected my ability to deliver this promptly, because I'd already committed to the sweater for my mom and the socks for my brother. And the reality is I just have a lot less time to knit nowadays, but I finished that and gave it to him for his birthday, which was at the beginning of February. And I was, again, knitting this under, like, right up until the wire. I was sewing buttons on in the car on the drive up to his house, and then I sewed the last couple buttons on in his kitchen, but that's okay. This project had so many, like, stumbling blocks. So first, here is a photo of him wearing it. This is its final form, the finished object, on the day I gave it to him. And he is very pleased. He emailed me to say he is very warm and comfortable in his new cardigan, and says that he is the height of senior fashion as a bonus. This, and as you can see, is a little bit big on him, but I encountered so many issues making this, mostly that are my own fault. Number one, I ran out of the yarn that I originally purchased and had to get more. And I really thought that 6 skeins of 113 grams of yarn at a pretty loose gauge would be enough. It was not enough. And so I went and got 2 more skeins of yarn, and they ended up being a completely different dye lot, like noticeably different. And then upon closer inspection, the original dye lot that I had was still somehow really highly variable. Like half of it was more of a chocolate rich brown, the second half was kind of muted, and then the third dye lot, or the second dye lot, but like the third clear distinct color group, is a very red leaning brown. Of course, it's not showing up red leaning when I try and show you, but there is a very distinct dividing line on the sleeve, and that was frustrating because it's one thing if it's a garment for me and I know that I'm dealing with dye lot issues and I have made that choice myself to play a game of yarn chicken or risk the consequences of having to buy a second dye lot, but I really thought that I had done the estimate to get enough, and I hadn't. So that's a real bummer, but again, entirely on me. And so what ended up happening is, without realizing, because I was normally knitting this in the dark because, you know, the sun sets here at like 4 p.m. for most of winter, and I'm knitting after work. So in the dim lamplight, I didn't notice that I had unintentionally done a very subtle striping throughout the body. Like up until most of the yoke is one dye lot, and then 5 inches of the torso are another, and then another next 5 inches are the first dye lot, and then the last is again that second dye lot, and then it starts again on the sleeves. So at least I can say that that's like a pattern. And then the second sleeve, where I had to put in this dye lot, of which I only ended up needing one of the 2 skeins I bought, and Wool Time is very generous, and they were like, oh, if you don't end up using this, just leave it hanked or skeined as opposed to wound up. And if there are no weird smells or pet fur or like cigarette smoke or whatever, you can bring it back with the receipt within 4 months. So thank you so much, Wool Time. I'm gonna do that, get my like $9 back. That's an aside, shout out Wool Time. The yarn stores that I've been to here in Ottawa are both excellent. That's the side note, but I really like the people at Wabi Sabi and I really like the people at Wool Time. I think that they are wonderful. Anyway, it's a red brown versus a chocolate brown versus a slightly muted chocolate brown. And that drove me bonkers because I was like knitting a men's like 2XL in 5 weeks, which again is because I didn't give myself enough time. But then to encounter issues when you don't have the time to encounter issues is frustrating. And I should have just bought more yarn. I should have started sooner, but I kind of couldn't start sooner because I had other gifts to do. So I just carried this cardigan around with me everywhere. And the thing is it was really big. I was aiming for a 56 circumference sweater, and I got, I think, a 60 circumference sweater, but because it's a cardigan, the sides flop out because I put the button band in last, so it felt bigger than it actually was. It felt like I was constantly wrestling with this like 6-armed beast. But the knitting itself was actually like very pleasant and easy. I like the yarn. The pattern is the Fundamental Top-Down Men's Cardigan by Jennifer Hagen, and I like it. I would use it again, not anytime soon because it feels too soon after having spent pretty much all of my free time or all my free knitting time on this for the past 5 weeks, but it comes in 4 or 5 different gauges, and the pattern itself is pretty simplistic. Each pattern with a different gauge is like basically 2 pages in 2 columns per page, and it's very straightforward, but I really think that the final object is exactly as advertised. The only thing is I think that the sleeves are too big, and I think if I was to make it again, I would stagger the rate of increases I think when I had maybe the last third or the last quarter to offset them from the raglan. So just basically make a compound raglan instead, where every 4th row I would increase for the sleeves, and then every 2nd row I would increase for the body. But I know that problem now because the sleeves I ended up making for my grandfather were huge. My mom looked at them and said, that's as much knitting as a separate sweater itself. And I said, yeah, I know, I feel it. But it's a grandpa cardigan. It's kind of meant to be loose. It's kind of meant to be baggy. That's what he meant when he said I'm the height of seniors fashion. And I think it's going to keep him warm, and I would so much rather too big than too small. I also think that's part of the reason why I ran out of yarn. Once I realized I was going to, I tried to make it so that the dye lots switched at points where it could be called a design feature instead of an execution failure. So I left the button band in the contrast, and I tried to extend my 2 remaining skeins of the main body color as much as I could, but because I didn't know to make the sleeves smaller until I had knit a substantial part of the sleeves, and I didn't have time to rip back and redo it, a lot of excess yarn that could have been saved and put into the second sleeve so I didn't have to buy that new dye lot was taken up in one of the sleeves. And before I blocked it, it looked really like lumpy and strange. I made Nathan, my boyfriend, try it on at one point, and it looked like he was wearing a Jedi robe that had been like really rumpled. And then this yarn blocked out so beautifully, and I find that's usually the case with 100% untreated wool. And this really just like smoothed so much over. It relaxed. It then started to have this really beautiful drape, and I was really, really impressed. I am now sensitive to how much the dye lots of this yarn seem to vary, but I would absolutely use it again to make something for myself or for somebody else who is totally fine wearing a rustic wool. And the yarn itself is Briggs & Little Regal, which is 100% Canadian, grown, milled, spun, and I guess eventually sold to me, which if anyone else is doing the whole Buy Canada thing is, I think, a useful tip. It's inexpensive and it's Canadian. And I used Regal, which is their DK weight, but it still knits up nicely at a worsted weight gauge, which is what I did to save myself some knitting. And I think overall, despite the stress that I had making this because of my own deadline that I gave myself and the dye lot issues, I think that this is a success. My grandfather is happy. I'm very happy to have made it for him. And because I've said this before, but my grandfather is someone who genuinely appreciates knitting. He appreciates wool, he appreciates Canadian wool, and when I make him stuff, he wears it. And he's a very knit-worthy person. I also got these really, really cute buttons for it. They're Celtic knot buttons, and they're made out of some type of metal, which had a nice sort of red tone to it, and I think that against the mostly deep chocolate brown of the cardigan, they popped really beautifully. I have one spare of those lying around and I can't find it, but I was originally so proud that I had one left over to be able to show you guys. I got them from Wool Time, which is here in Ottawa, and I was really impressed by their button selection. They had so many, and a lot of them were very reasonably priced. I think each of these was $1.35 per button, which felt inexpensive for what I got. And I think that they kind of really pull the whole thing together and make it look really nice. And it was nice to do a Celtic knot. It feels like it kind of honors or at least references my grandfather's heritage and mine a little bit too. So overall, that is my biggest recent win. But the thing is that making a really big all brown, all stockinette cardigan in a very short amount of time left me craving small things, strange things, interestingly constructed things, and colorful things like you cannot believe. So immediately upon finishing that, I gave my arms a break. And then once I was done giving my arms a break, I cast on an adult baby bear balaclava. Here it is. So this is the baby bear balaclava pattern by Pernille Larsen of Knitting for Olive. And it's called the baby bear balaclava because it's meant for babies and children, but I wanted one for myself, so I made this to fit my adult head. This is what it looks like on. I know I look ridiculous, but I'm also warm, and this was fun. This was just plain fun to make. The theme of this episode is just kind of dye lot issues because I also faced them here, and gauge issues. But this was very quick to make because I was knitting it so radically off gauge that I ended up making the first size, which was originally meant for 6 to 12 month old babies. And I actually don't have a small head for a woman. I have a average to large sized head for a woman, but this pattern is meant to be knit at I think 23 or 24 stitch gauge in 4 inches, and then with the yarn that I had and the tension I was able to achieve, I'm at a 17 stitch gauge, so large adult head in the balaclava, a success. This was a lot of fun to make. It's almost all short rows. I love short rows. I think they're fun. I just like shaping. I like shaping the ears. I've heard other people complain that they didn't like the construction of this, but I thought it was fun. You start from the faceband and then work backwards. The one other hood that I made was the November balaclava by Petite Knit, and you start from the top and work down. And I don't know, I don't think I have a preference for one or the other. Both were enjoyable for me, but I really liked the short rows for this. Doing a bunch of short rows and doing it something just kind of strange and fun in a statement color was exactly what I needed post grandpa cardigan. Yeah, I did once again experience dye lot issues. Again, because I ran out of yarn and I did not expect to do so at all. So this is actually made using two different yarns. The face framing ribbed band and the neck band are both Road to China light yarn in the color Red Jasper. And that is a mostly baby alpaca yarn that also has like yak, silk, and the smallest amount of cashmere in it. It's the softest yarn I've ever worked with, I think. And I got it specifically for this project to use in the two bands that were going to touch my face or my neck. But the rest of this is knit in the last skein I had of Les Moutons de Richard yarn, which I made my Lana vest in last year. And you can see immediately the dye lot difference on this, and that is the difference between most of this and then that tiny little bit at the back. The color choice and the shape of the tiny little bit in the back that doesn't match the rest does kind of remind me of, you know, something, but if you don't see it, I'm not going to tell you. It's just really funny. But what happened was I had a bunch of skeins to make this, and as you can see, there are two drastically different lots here. This bothered me a lot when I was making it. It doesn't bother me wearing it because when I put it on, the dye lot change sits right at my bust. And most people think that it's just the light hitting the part that's going out versus the light not hitting the part that's going in. No one's noticed. Or if they have, they were polite enough not to comment on it. But I had one skein left upon finishing this, and I had no idea what to do with it. It was sort of the lowest quality skein out of all the ones that I had for that project. I don't know why. But I think I had 5 total of the Les Moutons de Richard yarn, and 2 of them were a little bit lighter and so full of hay, and also not spun as nicely, and then the rest were spun very consistently with much less hay and vegetable matter and a darker color. I didn't notice at Twist Fiber Festival when I was just grabbing yarn off a table and going, yay, I love this, and chatting with the vendor. But I did notice when I got home, so I prioritized using, once I realized, the ones that were more consistently dark, even tension, like a very normal amount of vegetable matter. And then I had one that was left with very like thick and thin bits where some parts were completely like unspun and lots of veggie stuff and a different color. And so when my original plan to make this using my hand spun failed, my original plan was to make the majority of this in some hand spun, but trying to swatch made it clear that as much as I loved the color and texture and really rough and literally homespun quality of this swatch was pretty to me, but the gauge this is a chunky yarn, maybe even super chunky. Like the tightest I could go, which would have had me run out of yarn so quickly, was 13 stitches, and it was just way too far off. I did the math and I would have ended up with a 26 inch circumference balaclava to fit my head, it would be too big. I was gonna run out of yarn. As much as I think that this would have been so fun and wacky and lean into the very eclectic look I was going for with this, it just wasn't gonna work. But my goal this year is really to use up stash. And I had this one single skein that looked very nice with the Red Jasper Road to China light. And so I swatched, realized figured out which size worked best with the gauge for this Aran weight yarn and cast on, and I'm very, very happy. But I had 113 grams of it, and I didn't realize how quickly I was going to use it up. And so it really came down to the wire. I even skipped one of the rows of increases here so I could separate for the ears a little bit more quickly and start shaping the back to see if I could make it with the one skein. So the good news is I got more than one skein of yarn that I had no idea what to do with out of stash into a project that was very personally fulfilling to make and has been a lot of fun to wear. But the bad news is that I was then scrounging around my house for the 3 grams I knew I had left over from the Lana vest to begin with, and then used that to finish it, and it then now looks a little bit funny on the back of my head. But I'm very happy with this. I get looks when I wear it around. I kind of feel like I look like a Teletubby, you know, the red one. And it doesn't keep my forehead super warm because, as you can see, it doesn't, like, I kind of have to angle it to cover my forehead, but it certainly covers my forehead a lot better than my other hood, which doesn't cover my forehead at all, which starts like back here and goes around like that, which is a much more flattering look than this is. But it's been really cold here, and my experience has been that this is very warm and cozy up to about like -18 with a little bit of wind, but if there's a lot of wind, then it's not super cozy, but then nothing is. It's just too cold to be outside. You know, once we're getting into like -25, -30 with the wind chill, the solution is actually for me to just go back inside, not to be dressed like a big bear. I do get looks when I wear this because Ottawa is not a city known for its eclectic fashion. However, most of them seem to be like laughing and think it's funny, and that's okay for me. So this is my baby bear balaclava. I think it took me about 5 days to finish, which again is making the first size, but I was working on other projects and also doing a bunch of other things, so I didn't consider this to be particularly time consuming. And I'm very happy to have this pattern for future babies in my life that are born. And one of my friends really enjoyed Winnie the Pooh when she was a little girl, and so I have decided to make her future child a baby bear balaclava like this in some machine washable Winnie the Pooh colored yarn, so that her baby bear balaclava will look like Winnie the Pooh, so her baby will look like Winnie the Pooh, and I'm really excited about that. This comes in sizes, like, it goes from a 6-month-old to an 8-year-old size. So if you have a particularly small head, you might be able to get away with not really modifying it, but it was pretty easy to just knit it on a thicker yarn and then get one that would fit an adult head without as much knitting. In terms of modifications, I made almost none. I just removed 1 row of increases where I was shaping the ears. I also experimented with knitting in elastic in my very first round of knitting after the cast on to keep this faceband of ribbing tight and cinched, because I used this same yarn, which I doubled to meet the air and weight gauge that I was now knitting at. I don't think it made a difference. I think that this is not any more cinched in than it would have been without the elastic. I think that works better if you do a few rows of it at a neck, at a collar, than it did for this, especially since afterwards I blocked it and I don't know, it's a very stretchy knit in elastic that I have. But it was nice to try something new to see if it would work, because I used this same yarn for the faceband of my November balaclava, the other hood I made, and that stretched out after a winter, so I had to put in elastic anyway, and I think it's just better to wait until it stretches and then add it in afterwards. I don't think I noticed any benefits having sewed it in for this particular project at the beginning. I have noticed benefits to doing so in a collar, but not a faceband. And I thought that this pattern was clear. There were a couple typos that I was surprised hadn't been corrected in the years since this pattern originally came out, but they were not typos that affected the stitch count or anything meaningful. It was like the word repeat was spelled repat. So I just kind of giggled and moved on. And this was the first knitting for olive pattern I've actually ever made. If they're of similar quality, I am happy to continue making them. I did block this with stuff inside to make sure that it kind of kept a more, I don't know, circular head shape, because there was just so much fabric lying flat that it kind of wanted to flop and fold on either side. And I was worried that that was going to create a weird look and sort of set it into the fabric. So I filled this with a couple dryer balls and a travel Gravol and a travel Tylenol, and that was about the right size to block it like this. And I was happy with that choice. My other finished object is crochet. It's very silly. I've been working on it for the better part of a year, just very sporadically, and it actually still requires one little bit, and this is a gift. I actually finished this before the cardigan and all the stuff that I showed you. This is, I think, the last thing I finished before coming back to Toronto for New Year's and the holidays. And that project is a crochet Junimo from Stardew Valley. He is ridiculous. And he is actually missing a little bit of wire that's going to go in his antenna and help him stick up. And as you can see, I haven't tied off this very last end because I just want to make sure that if the wire is sticking out at the top, I have something to kind of use to wrap and disguise it. But yeah, this was a free pattern that I enjoyed. I thought it was very clear. The only thing is I really hate sewing on limbs, or I guess these little blush cheeks, the blush. On crochet, actually also knitting, I don't mind knitting the stuff. I also don't really mind seaming, but there's just something about sewing together parts of plushies that I'm bad at. Like, it really takes me a while to be able to place things in a way that looks not really bad. And this took me a few hours of sewing, which it shouldn't. Like, it won't take you a few hours of sewing, but it took me because I had to redo the cheeks like twice, and then I had to redo one of the eyes a few days later because I had them offset. Like, one of them, I can't remember which is the one that I moved. I think it was this one, was originally over here, like 1 or 2 stitches in. And Junimos are little sprites that live in the abandoned community center. They used to be in the forest, and they are kind of helpful little guys. And I made this because once a year I want to crochet, and about a year ago, I think there was that Stardew Valley pillow controversy or something, and then that got me thinking, wait, there are Stardew Valley crochet things. So I looked it up and I found this because my boyfriend is a huge Stardew Valley fan, and at the time he was playing it a lot. He goes through phases of what games he's into. I think that's true for most people. I also go through phases. And so I asked if he wanted a crochet Junimo. He said yes, and then 11 months later he will be receiving it next week. So here's a little guy. I found this pattern straightforward. I am not a very advanced crocheter, and I was able to figure it out and get the little creature you see. All of this was stash yarn. I crocheted it, I just made it much bigger than the original pattern calls for because I wanted to use this one particular cotton yarn that I had in stash as leftovers from something else. And I wanted it to be as close to what a Junimo would probably be in size if they were real, as opposed to like a keychain size. So I made there's 2 sizes to the pattern. I think I made the bigger one and then also used an Aran weight yarn and hook. You're given instructions for how to make 2 small legs and then 3 other like long black bits. And then those are meant to be the 2 arms and the antenna, and then also the little leaf that goes on top. However, I messed up when I was sewing. Like I said, I'm really not good at it. It's something I really have to practice. And the legs are meant to be the arms, and the arms are meant to be the legs. So, oops, but I don't really think it changes anything. I think that my tension was off, and as you can see, they're curling. But I think that kind of adds to the charm. I did block them. It didn't really help loosen that out because it kind of looks like he's on the move. Like, it looks like he's running. And I just think it's really cute. So I'm going to soon just insert the wire so that this can stand up and look like this, and get this out of my house and into the loving home it deserves. Yeah, I am interested in crocheting more plushies. I think that they're really cute and fun and satisfying, and a really good way to use up scrap yarn. I just need to find recipients for a lot of these things. I saw a YouTuber named Janina has a free crochet onion pattern that I think I'm going to make for one of my friends who loves onions and would like a plushie, and just keep these good crochet vibes going. Crochet, when you're doing single crochet like this, uses up quite a bit of yarn, which can be a problem if you're trying to save yarn. But if you're currently trying to get rid of a minimum 2,000 grams out of your stash this year, then that's great. And I will continue to prioritize little, fast, yarn-consuming gifts like this until further notice. Moving into whips, I only have two. I have the Jolly Holiday Tiny Human Knits socks. I finished one. And then I just finished the heel mostly for the second. I haven't picked up the side stitches, but I finished the heel flap and turn and just need to connect it back for the gusset. I might run out of yarn. I wasn't expecting it, but I don't have a lot left of this main one. And as you can see, for the toe of the first, I didn't change into this contrast color. So it might end up being a second pink toe, but out of order because I run out. I don't mind that. And this has been my office knitting at lunch and my commuting knitting in the meantime, but they're for me, so they're small, so they've been going pretty quickly. And someone at a craft night I went to recently thought that they were Hudson's Bay Company socks, and once she said it, I really see it. But they're the Jolly Holiday colorway from Tiny Human Knits, and I like them because they're sort of Christmassy without being in-your-face Christmassy, so I could wear them at any point in the year. But then if I wear them Christmas time, then I will know that I'm wearing Christmas socks. But I guess instead they just look like Hudson's Bay Company colors. And it's great. I just really like having a portable project, and this sort of bright thing, along with the balaclava and this, have just been very wonderful wintertime projects to combat the darkness that comes with this time of year. My sock recipe right now for these self-striping colors that I really want to have maximum visual impact and not be lost in a rib or anything like that is a 60 stitch circumference on a 2.25 millimeter needle. And then I knit until there's a color break at the cuff. This is a 2x2 rib cuff. And then I knit until I'm almost out of one of the white stripes to then do the heel, and so that when I pick up, it's just like that one last bit of white in order to extend the first color of the gusset as much as possible, because sometimes those stripes end up noticeably thinner than the rest, and that's a little bit annoying. And here you can see it is actually less, just because here you have almost twice the amount of stitches on the needles, and the yarn just doesn't go as far compared to here or here, where you're just back to the 60 stitch circumference. But I find that unless I point it out, you don't really notice, and that is my preference. I don't really care about color matching. I like it when it's sort of eclectic. I find it's a better use of all of the yarn. However, I am a little bit annoyed that I didn't think that through and just started again with the next color for the second sock immediately upon finishing the toe. So the color repeat literally goes la 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 here, like that. So that you have pink next to pink, but they're different pinks, and also they're socks. So I'm happy. I'm looking forward to wearing these. So that's my portable whip, my casual whip. My less portable whip is my blue and pink cardigan. I finished the body. I ended up doing a 2-inch button band at the bottom, which I'm happy with. I think that's the kind of the perfect length. I'm very happy with how these diamonds have turned out, and I've picked up this first sleeve and I've started knitting it. I picked up at a rate of 2 stitches out of every 3, and then did all the stitches and then immediately decreased 1 out to avoid gaps at the underarm, and then picked up a couple more stitches than the 2 out of 3 ratio at the shoulder cap, just because I wanted it to look nice with the horizontal braid I have going there. And I think that that's good. When I tried on, I was torn between a 2 out of 3 or a 3 out of 4 ratio. And it looks really small in comparison to the body, but the body's really long. I knit it to go past my torso, basically. And worst case scenario, I knit a few more inches, I look at it, it's awkward, I rip it back. And I have decided that my goal is to finish this by the end of the month. I started this in either September or October, and then it was on hiatus while I did all my gift knits. But this is a warm cardigan, it's a bright cardigan. It feels appropriate for spring, but this feels like a wintertime thing, and I just want it done. I really enjoy being back at it though. and it's been fun to film the dedicated project vlog, that's the boring side, for it. My next cast on is going to be a cowl for a coworker who is leaving. She's become a friend and I'm sad to see her go, and I think one easy way I can show my appreciation is to knit her something. Like I said, small gifts are a priority for me when it comes to knitting right now. And so I talked to her, and for a while I wanted to surprise her. I asked some other colleagues, have you heard if she has a preference for this or that or that or this or blah 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 blah. Everyone said she'll love whatever you give her. But I don't want it to be junk. You know, if you're gonna make something for someone, you're gonna put the hours in, the money in. I want it to be useful. I want it to be appreciated. So finally I just asked, would you prefer mittens or a hat? And she said, assuming I can't have a cowl? And I said, ooh, tell me more about this cowl plan. Do you mean like a circle scarf that you wrap a couple times of the, you know, circa 2010s? Or do you mean something narrow and kind of stiff? And she said something kind of narrow and stiff. And I said, perfect. And then I asked what kind of color preferences she had. She said, you feel free to choose. I said, how do you like this? She said, that would be great. So I'm looking at cowl patterns now. This is a DK weight. This is Barocco Vintage. It's the Barocco Vintage that I talk about all the time. I made a baby sweater in it. You can see that in my October podcast. And I have quite a bit of it left. It's soft and it's machine washable, and this coworker wants something machine washable, so perfect. I'm pretty sure I'm going to hold a strand of my Rico Make It Tweed with it so it can be rainbow speckles, because I asked and she said that seems like it would make it happier and I like it. And also, if she doesn't like the rainbow speckles, realistically, I've met her daughters and I think they would, so I think it'll work. And I was very happy to knit a cowl because I think it would take the same amount of time as a hat or mittens, if not less. So that is my next cast on. In terms of acquisitions, I bought these a month and a half ago. There was some sort of sale on Mary Maxim, which is an online Canadian yarn store. Oh, I'd like to say thank you for all the love and support on my last few videos, especially the budget yarn options one. I'm just happy that I'm able to make stuff that resonates with people and connects with people. But anyway, for the purposes of that video, I was looking up links as to where people can find some of the yarns that I was talking about. And I saw that here in Canada, Mary Maxim had a sale on Patton's Croy, one of my favorite sock yarns, so I bought 7. Some of these were like 3 or 4 balls. Some of these were like $4 a ball, and that was kind of too good a deal to pass up. I am otherwise on something of an unofficial yarn ban. I don't like hard and fast rules, but I just don't want to buy yarn right now, and I have a lot of yarn. But I love Patton's Croy. They are the socks that people seem to like the most, and I saw some colorways that I was not otherwise familiar with available on Mary Maxim, because it feels like every retailer has slightly different options in terms of Patton's Croy colorways. I sort of collect them to use them, not just hoard them, but I do sort of collect them. So I got 1 or 2 of these Midnight Orchid, this Midnight Orchid one, which is different greens and different purples, striped with cream. I got a Drift, which is blues with a little bit of brown. I got this saltwater color because it's a heather, but that's basically a solid color as far as Patton's Croy normally goes, and I wanted something to use as contrast heels and toes to stretch some of the other balls of Patton's Croy that I had, because their one flaw is they don't make a lot of solid colors to match their multicolor options, and I find that to be a little bit frustrating because it's a little bit thicker than the average sock yarn, so my other sock yarns don't go super great with it, but that's okay. And then I got Brownie, which is just brown stripes, and I got Landscape stripes, which is vibrant greens and blues, maybe a gray. And I think if I had to, this would be a good contrast toe and heel for that. And so I'm pleased. I like having a good stock of Patton's Croy. Was it the most financially responsible thing I've done? No. Was it really that financially irresponsible? Also no. And that's my only acquisition. I had many more plans of sweaters to make. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm very jealous of all the podcasters who are already starting to talk about spring, but we're still in the dead of winter where I'm from. Spring comes maybe the beginning of April. I don't care what the groundhog said. I know how it works around here, and I don't mind. I find that this has been a nice winter. It's been a beautiful winter. It's been blue sky and fluffy snow. So I will keep knitting my sweaters. I'll probably finish at least one when it's out of season, and that's okay. A while ago, a subscriber asked that I start talking about books I'm reading or media recommendations because I mentioned that I read. I always forget to do that. And I also don't always have books that I can recommend because sometimes I read things and they're just kind of meh. But I did recently finish a book that I feel worth recommending to you guys, and it was Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. It is, I think, one of the top fantasy novels of the past few, and I requested it from the library because this one I was pretty sure was a standalone, and I don't always have it in me to start a new like 5-book series and each book is 400 pages. When it's good, it's so good, but sometimes I just need something as a palate cleanser in between them, and I think I didn't really know what to expect going into Nettle and Bone, but I really liked it. I will give a content warning for discussions of like domestic violence, but I don't know how to explain it. It's a book with adult themes, but it feels like reading a fairy tale the way that fairy tales felt when I was a kid, in a way that resonated with me. I guess it kind of felt similarly to when I reread Howl's Moving Castle this fall, where as an adult, I was still engaged. The jokes were still funny, but there was something sort of comforting about the flow of the story. And Nettle and Bone, the main character is a spinner and embroiderer and weaver, and also a knitter, but her main things are embroidery and I think spinning. And there are a few moments of either fibercraft as metaphor or as like very directly relevant to the plot. Not something I expected going in, but it was a nice surprise. The plot of the story is this woman, Mara, decides to kill the king because his older sister has been married off to this evil king, and she realizes that he's abusing her sister. She has no recourse politically and realizes that the only thing she can do is kill this man. However, he is protected by the blessing of his fairy godmother, which means he cannot be killed by a foreign enemy. And so she goes on this quest where she has to complete 3 impossible tasks in order to gather the tools she needs to kill this evil king, and she finds friends along the way, and it's very much like an adventure quest kind of thing. And it has serious themes. I mean, the whole thing is about plotting a murder, and it's because of domestic violence, but it doesn't feel super scary. Like the whole, there's references to like the land of cannibals, but a main character is a witch with a demon chicken and a fairy godmother and a dog made of bones. And I don't know, it's well written, it's engaging, and it's a good standalone. So I also feel like it might be good fantasy for someone who isn't very interested in fantasy, who isn't someone who wants to commit to a big series or a ton of world building. I think that she balances world building and character development and humor and heartfelt emotion pretty well. And I appreciated that there was no gratuitous sex, which feels like it's increasingly becoming a mainstay of the genre that I find a little bit like, I could take it or leave it. So I found it really enjoyable and refreshing as I wait to start book 3 of the Empyrean or Fourth Wing series, which again, I also really enjoy. Like, I'm not just saying I only like things that are this, but I don't know, that was a book that I like really enjoyed. I found myself having to pace myself so that I didn't read too much so I could enjoy it longer. And that's my recommendation. So I hope all of you are well, and we'll talk again soon. Okay, bye.